Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another webinar at the National Library of Scotland. My name is Kenny Redpath, and I'm the Events Officer at the Library. Now, today marks the 76th anniversary of one of the great literary works of the 20th century. I am, of course, talking about George Orwell's Animal Farm, the satirical account of a group of farm animals who rebel against their human farmer, hoping to create free and happy. According to Orwell, the fable reflects events leading up to the Russian Revolution of 1917, and then onto and into the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union. But is it? Why is the book still part of the school curriculum today? I wonder. This afternoon, I'm delighted to introduce Angus Peter Campbell, who is here to talk about his latest work, that of translating Animal Farm into Gaelic. And I know he has some fresh views on the book. Angus Peter is an award-winning poet, novelist, journalist, broadcaster, and actor. Born and brought up in South Uist, he spent his teenage years in the Oban area, where he was taught by Ian Crichton Smith at the local high school. He graduated with double honours in politics and history from Edinburgh University, and since then he has worked in the media. I know that we are in for a real treat this afternoon, or whatever time it is, where some of our audiences are tuning in from all over the world. But before handing over to Angus Peter, can I just say that there will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. So get thinking, just type your questions into the Q&A function, and we will do our very best to get through as many as we can. But for now, over to you, Angus Peter.
Am I there?
We have your voice, but not your camera at the moment, Angus Peter.
Am I there now?
You are there. Thank you to technology. We are now live to the Cael of Loch Alsha, I think.
Well, more an tang, Kenny, agus fisker magav ulle geplikate versju fegen hudel more farsing agus hij bakrug shilligan how hamas mujin little hum of chirin. I took the tremendous risk of taking the laptop out into the garden, seeing we've worked so hard for it over the year, and I hope it brightens up the day for us all. I'm tempted to go over to the potato patch, but I shall leave that. And this has been a wonderful and a challenging job for me to do, which is to translate Animal Farm, the famous fable or fairy story, as George Orwell himself described it when it was first published in the 1940s. And translation, as you're of course not just translating one word from one language to the other, you're simultaneously translating a whole culture and a whole perception and a whole context, which is the most difficult thing to do. And I've been reading every word, every beautiful word that the great poet W.H. Auden ever wrote. And he was involved also in the process of translation. And he said a fabulous thing, which was when he is translating, he always asked himself, what, for instance, in this case, what would George Orwell say were he a Gaelic speaker? Which is a fascinating way to look at it, rather than what would Angus Peter Campbell say in the year 2021 to translate that word or that sentence, that thought from English into Gaelic. What would How would George Orwell put it? And my first challenge, I suppose, was the title itself, Animal Farm. And of course, I know the name, and I know what an animal is. We can name them by name, from goer to koe, kure, gia. Animal would vernacularly be for me beoch, a beast, beoch. So it would be beoch and then farm. Farm also challenged me in the sense that farm brings it with it a socio-political, historic resonance. In the sense that here in the Gaeltacht, of course, what we have as the common democratic denominator, you could say, is crofts, small portions of land, rather than farms. Farms are more common in mainland Scotland, not so much in the Western Isles. And farms, do they or do they not also bring a historical connection with the clearances of the 18th, 19th and centuries, in that the small holdings that the peasants and the common people had, that they were cleared from them, of course, to make sheep runs and large farms. So even there, you see, in the first instance of Animal Farm, you have such a hinterland of political and social history to inform the translation. And I, instead of using beast no beochen, chlach mi fachkel a tot trochach mer gebier mis munich iter tinje agus in beoch. I use the word creator, which is the same as in Scots or in English, creature. Because the word creature, I think, builds that bridge between the animals of the farm and the creatures that we are ourselves. And it was tempting to call it a crucht mingreteren, the croft of the creatures, as opposed to tuahanes, which is the farm of the creatures. Because I think that itself would raise another interesting and relevant question as to whether, because you have a crofting system, for example, of landholding, does that liberate you from the political and economic power game that is involved with farming or with land ownership? So the title is in Gaelic Tuahanes Mingreteren, which is the farm of the creatures. And I'm sure all of you who are here today have read Animal Farm, and whether that's been yesterday in preparation for today, questions shall be asked, or whether it was last week or 40 years ago in school. I will give a quick resume of the story in case you've forgotten it. That the farm is being run by Mr. Jones, and the animals, all the animals in the farm, naturally get fed up to the back teeth of working day and night, pulling harnesses, pulling carts, ploughing, manuring the land, etc. They get so tired of working so hard and ending up literally as pork chops on the table that they revolt and have a revolution and take over the farm themselves. But of course, once power is grabbed by an individual or by a particular group, in this case, Napoleon, who is the chief moch, Napoleon, power is centralized inevitably, and all the poor visionary animals and creatures and people who believed in the goodwill and the hope of the revolution and the change days are betrayed. So the novel and the story and the fable becomes very moving in the end. And I will read between the languages to give us all access to it. 5 or 6 very short portions of the story. First, I will read it in English, and then I will read my Gaelic translation of that. And I'll start at the very beginning, as the other man said. Chapter 1. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the potholes. And with a ring of light from his lantern dancing from side to side, he lurched across the yard, kicked off his boots at the back door, drew himself a last glass of beer from the barrel in the scullery, and made his way up to bed, where Mrs. Jones was already snoring. Now, that sentence, I know all the Gaelic words for all that, but again, the challenge was Mr. Jones. And I was tempted just to call him Maishtith, which is the Gaelic for Mr. Jones, because there aren't that many Jones, as far as I know, in indigenous Gaelic circles. But I called him the kind of nearest to his son of John, Maishtith Machien. And again, Manor Farm. But what is Manor Farm? What does Manor Farm mean? I mean, it means simply, I think, the big house that ran the farm. So that's what I called it. So, and the Gaelic reads, "Va Maishtith Machien, o Huahanas and Davod, is ne pohan kithke, a glasig son a henge. Ach a jons garo joche, jiech nich an a torsenpeke uune. Huela the ere gachele launcher, hillik a gehe vaten ik a doras cool, Vorte glanjavor ljun ga heen en een tukset on zijn scullery, agus ring a lia suasum stedig an jeppy, for an roi ven chenne na via lesraun. And just a wee note on that, when in the first sentence it is, Mr. Jones at the Manor Farm locked the, but he was too drunk to remember to shut the potholes. I didn't know how to translate he was too drunk. Not because there are no drunkards in the Gaelic universe. And I was very tempted to use the vernacular idiom, va the gu Gaelic. He was blind drunk. But at the beginning of the story, I thought, Mr. Jones is imagining himself to be a bit of a dunuosel, a bit of a gentleman. And gentlemen don't get blind drunk, they just get drunk. So I translated that quite straightly at that point. So that's only the first sentence. And I think as we move on to the story, what it kind of articulates really, really well at the beginning of the story is that the dream that we all have of liberty and of freedom and of equality, liberté, égalité, fraternité, source is so beautiful. And it's articulated by the Major in his speech at the beginning of the revolution, where in his dream he tells the geese and the ducks and the hens and the horses and the cows and the sheep, no animal must ever live in a house, or sleep in a bed, or wear clothes, or drink alcohol, or smoke tobacco, or touch money, or engage in trade, because all the habits of man are evil. And above all, no animal must ever tyrannize his own kind. Weak or strong, clever or simple, we are all brothers. No animal must ever kill any other animals. All animals are equal. And then his speech continues. And now, comrades, I will tell you about my dream of last night. I cannot describe what my dream was about. It was a dream of the earth as it will be when man has vanished. But it reminded me of something I had forgotten of long ago. Many years ago, when I was a little pig, and I have a little pig here called Shawnee Trunky. I take him to bed with me every night and I cuddle him in. Many years ago, when I was a little pig, my mother and the other sows used to sing an old song of which they knew only the tune and the first three words, like they do in Gaelic, the music is doing it, Filoro, Filoro. No, and then everybody goes, because the words don't really, they're just subsumed by the tune. And the major continues, I had known that tune in my infancy, but it had long since passed out of my mind. But last night it came back to me in a dream. And the tune is called Beasts of England. And I'm sorry, Harchin, Ahmed Lahain Shogaf. Old Major cleared his throat and began to sing. As he had said, his voice was hoarse, but he sang well enough, and it was a stirring tune, something between Clementine and La Carucha. The words ran, beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time. And I've got that in Gaelic, and I loved translating it because translating poetry is such a challenge and a joy. Bias than hasin, bias than alap, bias than yekach chi the zaum, eschevle mo vrier and kalama. Manalai and Orvisound. I wouldn't sing y'all, but it goes on. Halamor, a chin kakinjach, near Hillikashing and Dinyamach. Is Yevshin Achian or Sinshon, even real le much, just eich. Yevshin Surs, the Vakach real as Havi Achken your dream, Havi Strien as Kip Carpola, Havi Meister, as a tune, Pikach Berches er Bial of Kar. Jarnes, Rauwert Green, Carlos, Lussen, Jakach Shorse, aan them patches nach begown. Beer Gideon, Jersley, Iveness, beer clown, Reek and good, beer goo, a shade of kindness, and la, a yevshing surs. Famous Strivor, a son of Lashen kit. Dus kuts nach hachje kroes is gois kudig aan een blaar sonne soers, biesten hassing, biesten alape. And in English it finishes, where is that song? Have I lost it? I'll find it. The bright will shine the fields of England, purer shall its waters be, sweeter yet shall blow its breezes on the day that sets us free. For that day we all must labour, though we die before it break. Cows and horses, geese and turkeys, all must toil for freedom's sake. Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime, hearken well and spread my tidings of the golden Farage time. And it reminds me so much of Brexit. And the sunny uplands that were promised and folk apparently believed. And the revolution goes on. And what struck me again, rereading this on the Gaelic, I was in the Bear Ride Harchin, was at the heart of this is a story of the revolution and power and the failed revolution. But even more contemporary and relevant, at the heart of the story is fake news, is the way in which, and I'll use these two words, propaganda, the power, the absolute power of propaganda, tied to the way in which not just our perception or the horses and animals' perception of what happened is altered and changed, but the actual facts of history of what happened are altered. So that when Snowball, for instance, who was one of the revolutionaries and one of the revolutionary leaders, fought his great battle. He was then deemed to be a betrayer by the leader, Comrade Napoleon. And although he'd fought almost to his death, the PR agent, the propagandist, let's not mention names, but the PR agent, who is called Squealer on the Bearla, and in Gaelic he is called the Skimmeler, goes around giving this message. Afterwards, Squealer was sent around the farm to explain the new arrangement to the others. Comrades, he said, I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a pressure. Oh, no. On the contrary, it is a very deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you, my friends, make the decisions for yourselves. But sometimes we might make the wrong decisions, comrades. And then where would we be? Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of a windmill. Snowballs, who, as we now know, was no better than a criminal. Somebody says, but Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed, said somebody. Ha! Bravery is not enough, said Squealer. Loyalty and obedience are more important. Now, if I can find that in Gaelic, that's on page 49. As J-Live ga skimmeler goed chimichel en tuahanish, son policy uur wenigu, ben a goede kreter. A hartjen, has essen. Ha me dages gewille goede kreter en show a tiction. Agus mochtjalas. Een jeeper ha comrade Napoleon in the Yano. Le vigale heen en doorlog warach ga show. Na smunich of a hartjen. Gret tlach, gus talagus, han den kennartas. Oh, ga nee. Ga nee, kajarabach en jarab gugle. Ze oorlog moor agus oorlog traumaham. Gaan je een greter, de krutchen nas moer na haar comrade Napoleon. Gewil gach kreter ko innen. Us han we gar halichtje, lik al geefje kagunian heen jaro. A hoornen. Stochen janchevne kagunian kar. De hartjen. Agus kaartje bukshin in oorsen. Orse Cummings. Jee hier dan je maar Cummings. Kan na bukshivet kagunig Paul Snachke lenten. Le goed Ashlingen met de mulden kuie. Paul Snachke ossen. Maar hij is kan jullie van een eegkarach. Sir, ach hapatje a train, ik plan een pagehoed kreterken. Ha! Gaan je treventers les heen maken jaar, het skimmelen. Ha gielschach, agus onlach, nas kutrmicha. Agus, I think the alteration of facts is just such an astonishing phenomenon in this book because it reflects life. My wife, Havenaka Mishaws Vegra, Vigital, on Saturdays in Edinburgh, her parents often went to the rugby. Because if you're upwardly aspiring, I think you went to the rugby. And so she would be sent to her granny's wee house on Smithfield down at near Dalry. And Saturday afternoon, they would play games there. I was noticing, and up near 5 o'clock, some of us of a certain age will remember this, the television went on and the football results would appear on the old teleprinter. Colchester United 2, Scunthorpe Rovers 3. And as that appeared, her granny would say to her, oh, Lindsay, run down to the chip shop and get some chips and I'll fry some eggs. And then they would have this delightful thing of having fried eggs and chips from the chip shop. And I think one day she was explaining this to her mother, and her mother said, "Oh, that didn't happen very often." Of course, it didn't happen very often, just every other Saturday. Oh, lovely. Now, Squealine Changing Facts. And I just want to move on to, it's not all politics, this book. It's very moving, you know, and those of you who remember or have read the book recently, the most moving characters are, of course, a Boxer, who's the horse, who works so diligently and endlessly until he's killed, really. Agus, ich kan ha crutchen as an ashling, agus ha crutchen ans naramachs, ha crutchen genuring granchen even a bear. Agus ha kan heen if me fasu is me keepin jik, me again me kenny an the ski and open. Then ik mahad yachi in la, agus hold me who's a state that rather be who's in a crouchart. Agus hold me a kralem vahad, hursty. Rather we koop die huis in hen. Ha licht mile achtet who's in a crouchart continue pe. When I was 14 in Clachantzil near Oban, I remember my father, who was a traveling tradesman, a joiner and builder, coming back from having been working up in the Neudert Peninsula, and saying to my mother upstairs, I remember it so clearly, saying to her, there's 50,000 acres of land up in Neudert and not a living soul on it. Because it was owned at that time, and afterwards by Lord Brockett, as this huge estate with no people on it. And at that moment, I thought, why is it? Because we didn't have a croft either. I think this is quite important in my personal journey. We didn't have a croft. We only had a site with a hut really on it. That would be called a chalet nowadays, where I was born and brought up. And so we didn't have access to fresh milk or to, and I was kind of aware that we were the lower than crofters who had land and access to housing, etc. And my father was building houses for them. They were getting grants and loans, etc. And when he came back at the age of 14 from Neudert, I think I wondered, why is it? Why is it? And I still wondered this about 1,000 years later. Cymara hai, Kirstana hai, Miris Cruia agus Gopricus Mahad. Chanirjin fas Shianis Nishar Yah, as in this Mr. Yanavashin. How come the harder my father works, the poorer we get, or at least we don't get any better? And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand why labor, and he worked endlessly, was unrewarded in that sense. So I went to Edinburgh University, as Kenny says, to study history and politics, and it was a terrible course. The politics consisted of learning how the structure of a parliament and the Houses of Commons and the emerging European market and the House of Representatives in the United States and the Soviet Union worked structurally and functionally, how many MPs that were there, how they were elected and what the system was. And it never got to the heart of it. I was notion geforstelig in my junior honors year, Hanneke Dinjava for California. He arrived and said, "My name is Richard L. Ashcroft. I'm from the University of Columbia, Los Angeles, and I'm a Marxist." And that was his first statement. And he was fabulous. He was fabulous. He taught us that whatever you read, whether it's the Oban Times or the London Times or the Los Angeles Times or the whatever Times, that it comes from a specific class position or gender position or cultural position or linguistic position or whatever, and to put that always into the context of how you understand and perceive literature or life itself. And in this section of the book, Boxer has been working his heart out. Late one evening in the summer, a sudden rumor ran around the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down to the windmill, and sure enough, the rumor was true. A few minutes later, 2 pigeons came running underneath the news. Boxer has fallen. He's lying on his side and he can't get up. About half of the animals rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer in Chech, Moor, Watcher, Foncho, between the shafts of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his sides matted with sweat, a thin stream of blood trickled out of his mouth. Clover, Ngaricheke, Ivana Kharacheke, dropped to her knees at his side. Boxer, how are you? Agus, catch on the Gaelic, page 97. And I'm going to ha Boxer and a hen. Has Shemeraka the Gonian the Hoover Boxer, Louis, Che Hachet. Scavan which Boxer and the Goofhound. Hanelaka Chefe, Sulamik Jack of a Willingu, Kriechnichu as Moonisha. Had Joe Stars Jachlachan the Hrinich Henry. Harawakam ach mia sele de golf you is a griach likalge. Against the feeding from a kind of earth, the magriach likalge. Agastoche, when I have been yam and a fast shenkuchach, can they yet listen a griach likalge, and no naam, a son of a nachopenacho. Famous in coheranks of vat with Shemarak. Rui, Kutchikan against the skimmeler, J. Hachet. Not to any avail. As I had you follow. And I'll finish. I'll come to my end of my thing as I get my son Kus Ramashin. I guess I suppose part of the most famous portion of Animal Farm for Nachel I can tell it's like kind of comes Levi, comes Scrivi at the Hulu crater. Ach Hashors at the Comes Levi is Comes Scrivi. Ek Kuch, ek Benjamin, I guess, had the diction in the shin. I'll move at the end to, I suppose, what's at the heart of the novel, of the book, and that the animals and the creatures have, they can't read or write. And again, I mean, I didn't go through any Gaelic medium education. We all spoke Gaelic in the community, but when I went in primary one to primary school, it was taught through the medium of English. So I never learned really to write in Gaelic. The teacher stood there and says, "Bring forth the horse." The horse was brought. In truth, he was a noble steed, a Tartar of the Ukraine breed. The speed of thought was in his mind, wild as the wild deer. I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea in the sky. And all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer it by. And so I had to learn literacy. I mean, there is a fantastic phrase from the great late Professor Derek Thompson that we too often we put the oral tradition over on this bench and we put literacy over here. And the great Derek Thompson kind of bypassed that and said there was such a thing called oral literacy, where you didn't need necessarily to read, but you had it orally from memory. For instance, Rob Down, the great Mackay bard, who could neither read nor write, yet could recite not just screeds of traditional Gaelic poetry, but could tell you firsthand the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis through Jonah, etc., because he listened to Da Heraman Hulala. So the animals are and we can apply that culturally and politically, are not illiterate. They are illiterate. They haven't been given the ability or the capacity or the skill to read and to write. And I think that has an echo in terms of where we are with Gaelic, that I write this. And of course, I'm so pleased as Gavelani Gaelic, agus geleef, kucha, aha ism ik in de naam gewil ne huye, ne mielten worden de geel, aha agus hanna sassigaif. We leven in the Beerla, maar na Goedingev, in the Gaelic, Kunst Goedingev in the Gaelic. So that's a kind of political side point in a sense, but at the heart of the issue as well. And of course, when when the commandments are written on the wall at the beginning of the book, the seventh commandment is Ha chule creator ko inan. All animals are equal. But you know, sometimes when you go somewhere and you think, is that a new house there? No, I let the rotte in again when I heard no. Oh, with the grow jarig. When you go somewhere and you think, there's a new window in that house, or there's a new road, or that bank manager. Remember when you used to see bank manager? So you have to go and answer questions on the internet now, and you don't see anyone face to face. So things kind of change, and the creatures on the farm had and they noticed, of course, that there's different words on the wall. Like there's a different prime minister. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling at his shoulder. He looked round, and it was Clover, and that's the boxer's horse friend. Beautiful, beautiful character. Her eyes looked dimmer than ever, and without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round to the end of the big barn in Saul Moor, where the 7 commandments were written. Agus is an minute naga, his at the quiet is a jar in the valla. Hama leershin ifaliku. Even when I was young, I could not have read what's written there. But it appears to me that that wall looks different. I was going to kiss to Benjamin. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be? And for once, Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. The 7 commandments of equality and not drinking and not sleeping in a bed, because all the leaders are now doing that. They're lying in these silken beds and having big parties, and the 7 commandments have gone. There was nothing there now except a single commandment. It ran, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Son ik geet is die woont ik Benjamin een reeltje heen op de stuk. Ik leven mag nu een skrietje de vallen. Voor een skrietje een shinnische als je er een anje. Bij kra aan de vachten moren. Ha hule kreter ko innen. Ha kutje kreteren. Dat is ko innenige na kutjela. Taplief.